Welcome to another enlightening episode of The Truth About the Plant, the show that takes you on a journey through the world of psychoactive plants and alternative wellness, all while delivering real, actionable insights you crave. I'm your host, Christina Dees, and this is my equally talented co-host, Dr. Amanda Ryman, and she gets the honors of telling you why we're here.
Well, thanks, Christina. So we are here because it can be so gosh darn hard to find good, valid information about cannabis on the internet. You might have a really pressing question, one that may impact your health and well-being or safety. And you go on, you Google it, and you get 1,000 different answers. And many of those answers may completely contradict each other. And so you might be left wondering, how do I get the truth? Well, that's where we come in. We're here to give you the truth about your most pressing questions about cannabis in 15 minutes or less, backed by science, so you can get those actionable insights you crave and then go about your day. You can think of us as your kick-ass granddaughters or your really cool aunties, the women in your life who will always tell you the truth.
That's right. And whether you're planning a road trip or you're catching a flight, this is one travel topic you don't want to miss. Today, we're diving into a viewer question that's got everyone packing their bags and wondering, can I travel with cannabis? Well, buckle up because we're about to explore the ins, the outs, and all the green zones of traveling with your favorite plant. So let's break down what you need to know about traveling with cannabis. All right, with so many states legalizing cannabis, it can be hard to remember that federally, it is still a crime. Cannabis may be okay to use in San Francisco, for example, but the feds rule the friendly skies, so moving cannabis through the air gets more complicated. So, is it safe to travel with cannabis? Can I do it?
Well, that is a great question, and I get it a lot. I actually just got back from a family vacation to South Carolina, and I live in Washington, which is a legal state, and South Carolina definitely is not a legal state. So there's a lot of questions that people have about how or if they can move cannabis across the country. So first, let's cover driving, because one thing that people like to do, especially in the summer, are those wonderful road trips. And so here I'm going to tell you that if you live in a legal state and you plan to drive around that state, you really just want to look at your laws. What are your state laws regarding traveling with cannabis in the car? So, for example, some states have laws about where the cannabis needs to be in the car, right? Like open container laws for alcohol. Some states allow you to have open containers, some states don't. I used to live in Texas, which literally had drive-through alcohol retailers. And then I was in Wisconsin, where you can't even buy liquor after like 9 o'clock or beer after 9 o'clock. So every state has different rules when it comes to alcohol. And it's the same with cannabis. So what do you need to do in order to be compliant? You may not be able to have the cannabis jar or package open in the car. It might be required to be put in the trunk of the car. So understanding your state laws is step one if you're going to be driving with cannabis.
I live in North Carolina, where cannabis is still legal, and a simple possession is considered a misdemeanor. So I know you live in Washington now. What are the rules there?
All right, so in the state of Washington, now again, this is just the state of Washington, so you're going to want to look up the rules where you live. But in the state of Washington, you have to have the cannabis in the original container, sealed, and in the trunk of the car. So no taking that flower out and putting it in a baggie, no taking those gummies out and putting them in a Tupperware. That cannabis has to be in its original package, sealed, never opened, and in the trunk of the car. Furthermore, in Washington, you are not allowed to drive across state lines with cannabis, even if you are driving into another legal state like.
And Washington and the other states have a lot of land owned by the feds. So how does that impact that travel?
So that's a really great point. The feds do own some roads and land in states like Washington. We have 3 national parks not too far from where I live. Those are federal property. So bringing cannabis into a national park, for example, would be breaking federal law. So not only do you want to know what the rules are, you want to know if the place you plan on going is owned by the state or is owned by the federal government. And so before you travel with cannabis, you want to, again, know the laws of your state. You want to avoid bringing it across state lines if possible, especially when you are traveling through an illegal state. I would not recommend traveling with your cannabis through Idaho or Nebraska or Kansas because, and I can't prove this, but I have just heard that sometimes Highway Patrol in those states will target cars that are coming from states that have legal cannabis because they think there might be a possibility that they have cannabis in the car. So you just want to be really careful if you happen to be driving through one of those states and you happen to have cannabis in your car, make sure you are obeying all traffic laws. Make sure you are not speeding, that you are using your turn signal. Do not give anyone an excuse to pull you over.
All right, so it sounds like checking with your local and state laws is the place to start, as well as the laws of the state you pass through and your final destination. So, how about flying with cannabis? Since TSA runs the show, I'm assuming it's more cut and dry.
So, not exactly. So, you're right that the feds oversee air travel. And because of that, flying with cannabis in most cases is not allowed. You may even see boxes at airports where you can deposit your cannabis before going through security. I know that Denver International Airport has these. I know that O'Hare Airport in Chicago has these. So, we're going to say generally no, you're not allowed to bring cannabis on the airplane.
Okay, but what if you're a medical patient, you have your medical card, and you need to bring cannabis with you, via
Well,
air or
unfortunately,
driving?
yeah, I mean, you would think that that would not be any different than needing to bring your opiate prescription or other controlled substance with you as long as you have a prescription for it. However, according to the feds, there's no difference between medical and recreational cannabis in the eyes of the law. So, that being said, I did do some research on some legal opinions about bringing medical cannabis through the airport. And some airports, like Oakland Airport and San Francisco Airport, kind of have a reputation for not cracking down on people who have personal amounts of cannabis, which in California is 1 ounce or less. But it's often up to the discretion of the person that finds it. So I had an experience at Oakland Airport several years ago. This was before cannabis was legal in the state of California. It was legal for medical purposes, and I was a medical patient. I was traveling somewhere. I had an eighth of cannabis in a jar in my carry on. And when it went through security, it dinged because I had something else in my carry on that was metal. It was like a pin or something, some kind of jewelry. And so they asked to search my bag. I had the jar of cannabis rolled up in a ball of socks. That's how I used to travel with it. And so they unpacked my bag, they unrolled the socks, they had my jar of cannabis. I was like freaking out and sweating bullets that I was going to go to jail. They asked me if I was a medical patient. I said that I was. They asked if I had my ID and my recommendation on me, which I did because I was told if you're going to travel with cannabis as a patient, always have your recommendation on you or your state medical card on you. So I gave it to them. They walked away for, it was like 5 minutes, but it literally felt like an hour. And then they came back and they said, "You're okay to go. This checks out." And then they asked if I wanted them to put the jar of cannabis back in my socks, which I said yes. But I think the moral of this story isn't that you can fly with cannabis through Oakland Airport. The moral of this story is that sometimes white privilege allows you to get away with doing things that are not legal. And so when I tell this story and people ask me, well, does that mean that I can carry my medical cannabis through the airport? What I say is that if you are someone who is discriminated against anyway and is already under bigger scrutiny because of who you are in a security situation, I recommend against it because I feel like if I had been a different colored person or perhaps if I had been dressed differently, I may have had a different outcome. So even though airports may not care about cannabis, I mean, to be honest, most airports care mostly about explosives and bombs. And second to that, large amounts of drugs that are being trafficked through the airport. So they probably don't care enough to do anything about your piddly eighth or ounce, but they could if they wanted to, because there is nothing in the law that protects you.
So it sounds like even for medical patients and even in legal states, flying with cannabis is a risk that you may or may not want to take.
Absolutely. And again, like in all cannabis situations, the risk is higher or lower depending on the level of discrimination or scrutiny that you already face based on who you are.
Well, what about international travel?
I advise against it. It's like a whole other level of security. And interestingly, I would advise even more against bringing it back into the United States. I've traveled internationally. I will admit, this is not, no one come after me. It was a long time ago. I have brought cannabis outside the United States and traveled with it to Uruguay, to Brazil, and to Barcelona. When I arrived in those places, because you go through customs when you arrive. And when I arrived in those places, they were just like, welcome, have fun, and sent me on my way. When I came back to the US, they were hardcore. I mean, I came back from a trip to Uruguay once, and I had been on the plane for like, a million hours, and I was exhausted. And it was like 3 a.m. when we got through customs. And they were like, so what were you doing in Uruguay? And I was kind of being a smart ass. So I was like, I was at a marijuana conference. And the guy was like, well, you didn't bring any back with you, did you? And I was like, no, man, I live in California. That'd be like selling snow to an Eskimo. And then he was like, all right, full search. And they like sent me to the line where I had to go through like the whole search, huge search process. So the next time I came back, I was like, I'm a public health professional, and did not go any further than that. I have had friends who have gotten really scrutinized and searched driving back over the border into the US from Canada. So I would say if you are traveling internationally, I would say no. And if you say, look, I need to have it because it's my medicine, don't bring flour. There's a lot of product forms you can bring that are going to be less smelly and less noticeable than flour. So if you really, really need something, I even recommend looking for tablets or capsules or things that would
Mm-hmm.
look like other prescription medications.
Yeah, that's what I say too, because you can easily put them in another container, with that has a label that it looks like. So, yeah, I love that. That's so much great information. What would you do? What would you say are the key takeaways today?
Okay, so if you're not going to remember anything else about this episode, even though I hope that you will, here's what you need to remember. So on the road, follow your state laws for traveling with cannabis. So if you live in a legal state, they should have laws about how you need to store your cannabis while driving. And also check and see if you're allowed to move from one state to another with cannabis where you live, because this may or may not be allowed. If you can do it, and if you are going to a legal place, I recommend purchasing it at your destination and using it before you head back home. Be careful about possession and use on federally owned lands, because you may not have exceptions for legalization in these places. I advise against flying with cannabis, but if you do, make sure you are within the personal possession limits for the state you are leaving. And as I said, if possible, bring a form that isn't flour. Something like gummies or capsules or pills are a lot easier to disguise, and they don't have an odor. Do not travel with it internationally if you can help it, especially not back into the United States. Customs in the United States is really, really strict, and they will not hesitate to put you through a pretty big search if they think you're carrying something. And the last tip is that if you find yourself with extra cannabis when leaving a legal state to fly home, it makes a great tip for your Uber driver.
Love it. All right, well, that is a wrap on today's episode. If you're still packing questions, well, we want to hear them. You can drop us a line at info@mypersonalplants.com. You can send us a message on social. Don't forget to check out our YouTube channel for more plant-powered wisdom. Hit the subscribe button where our subscribers are growing fast. And so you can give us a like, share this episode if you really liked it. And until next time, stay curious, stay green, and may your travels always be smooth with or without the herb. See you next time.